Hi everyone, it's the Fish Flippers. We just want to preface this podcast with an acknowledgement of the historical anti-Asian sentiments and the recent rise in Asian hate crimes over the course of the pandemic. It isn't a straightforward issue, but rather stems from some complex roots. Let's hope that in the rest of 2021, we can learn more about each other and break down the barriers of ignorance. Now, on to the podcast. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another podcast with your favorite hosts, Richard and Jenny. This is the Fish Flip Podcast, and today we're talking about cultural appropriation. Is culture appropriate?
Is cultural appropriation helpful or harmful, and what even is it?
Is culture inappropriate?
Okay.
Rude.
You're the rudest man in this house. And the
I don't know.
only man. So,
Is my culture appropriate? Is your culture appropriate? Would you like to tell me? What is culture appropriation?
cultural appropriation, according to the definition.
Appropriation. Okay.
Cultural
Okay, I'll let you go.
appropriation.
You go.
Cultural appropriation, according to the definition I have collected from various sources, it originates from the term cultural colonialism, which is seeing a culture or art through the lens of the group with the most power, which has been usually white people. So white people viewing another culture's art through their lens. And it's when that group with the most power then presents this idea from that culture as something they created. And usually it's tagged on that the group in power is also profiting off of this. So it's a dominant group taking an idea from a minority group's culture, claiming it as their own and profiting off of it. This is what I gathered to be the purest form of cultural appropriation, though there are bigger and lesser examples which others would consider cultural appropriation as well.
So cultural appropriation is where the dominant group who wields the culture is able to take that culture for their own benefit and kind of wield it, I guess, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? Minorities cannot appropriate culture?
I don't think it's impossible, but I think part of the reason it's cultural appropriation or cultural colonialism is that it's just easier for the dominant group to take these things and do them. So let's say a minority group could also do the same thing. They might get criticized for it, whereas the dominant group would not, because they are the dominant group. They are who is considered to be normal, quote unquote.
Why can't people just leave other people's, leave their cultures alone? If they want a certain culture, why not just let things be? I mean, if given that the culture isn't harming anyone, right? If it's not like creating like a dangerous situation for the other culture, why does one culture have to eat up the other culture?
I think it's a misinterpretation of appreciating and sharing cultures. We live in a country like Canada and America are what people might term as melting pots. There are many different people living on the same piece of land. But in my opinion, appreciating is when you learn about the culture and maybe you're invited to attend a ceremony or a party, and in that way you can enjoy it. But when you make a business based off of it, I don't know, it's kind of a gray area.
I mean, from what I've seen in the news, whenever cultural appropriation is called out is when somebody with some kind of a higher status or more higher popularity and fame takes a piece of something from another culture and perhaps appoints it to themselves. and somehow maybe benefits socially from that,
Mm-hmm.
or like like financially or socially, right? That seems to be the time that it gets called out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now, is that to say that that culture is they're stealing a culture? Is that what cultural appropriation is saying? Then it's being unjust to the other culture because they are not allowed to actually use that element of the other culture at all. Does Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting at is does this mean that a group of people can own a culture? Is there ownership? Is that a thing?
I don't think there's ownership over culture, but
Right?
in a way, like a really hot topic right now is white chefs cooking minorities' foods and having like a white chef having a Mexican restaurant or white chef having a Chinese restaurant. Really hot topic right now, really controversial. A lot of white chefs are getting a lot of criticism for making money off of another culture's food. And so there's the argument of like, can you own food? Can you own dumplings? Why can't white people also make dumplings? But then the counter argument a lot of the time is, well, what's unfair is that these white people can make the dumplings and sell them for $12 a pack, whereas a Chinese restaurant, which has been making them for years and they're also delicious, has to sell them for $5. Because there's still the view, if it comes from a Chinese restaurant, it should be cheap. I think that's where the problem is. But then also, I don't want to personally blame the white chef because he's interested and he's engaged and he really likes this food. So
Yeah, I think maybe like, there's an element of using a culture or something and from a culture that is respectful, and then there's probably another side of it that's kind of perhaps pretentious or perhaps a little condescending, right?
there is, for sure, there is. There was
Yeah.
even so many recent cases of, especially around Chinese cuisine, white people, on the one hand having their restaurants and you think they're appreciating it because they're cooking this style of food, but where people had a big problem is there's a lot of terms thrown around saying like, I'm cleaning up Chinese food, I'm refining it. And another case is there's this one woman from the UK I didn't follow her on Instagram, but I found out about her because I follow a lot of chefs and cooks. She built her whole Instagram around making Chinese food, and it looked delicious. It looked amazing. And she said she loved China. She loved all the flavors and the inspiration that she got from being there.
Right.
But what people had a big problem with her profile is that in the description it said taking dirty street food and making it clean, something along those lines. That's a paraphrase.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
And so it's like, this is the problem. And this is the problem with people taking other cultures' foods, is there's still this, whether it's conscious or totally unconscious, like it might have been in her case.
Yes.
Like it probably was, because she said she loved going to China, she loved the food. There's still this unconscious like racism going on that has to do with food as well. It's like, what do you mean dirty street food?
Yeah, I guess in that type of circumstance, it seems like from the outside in, it seems very ignorant, right? They may mean well
Yeah.
in their own context, which is completely a Western context.
Yeah.
They're, the fad diet, the whatever the health conscious element is up at the time.
Superfood.
Yeah, so they try to maybe blend kale into some kind of a Chinese stir fry or something and say this is the better Chinese food or something. And yeah, something like that would be very ignorant of the fact that there is, the original cuisine, and many millions, billions of people have kind of lived through that kind of era of like creating their own culture and their cuisine, and this person here is kind of just stepping on it, right?
Yeah.
So something like that seems very unfortunate. It seems ignorant.
Yeah, it was unfortunate, and I don't want to be like a gatekeeper or anything. I'm just scrolling through my Instagrams, reading, and so a lot of people were offended and said, "Hey, that's not cool. It's not cool to call our food like that." So she did issue, as you must on social media now, an apology, but what made it worse is it wasn't even an apology. Like, she couldn't truly see what was wrong with the wording, because her apology was just along the lines of, how
So
people
it is
say,
ignorance.
"I'm so sorry if some were offended by what I said." If some were offended by what you said, putting again like the blame on the minority who is offended. It's just a joke. Come on, man. You don't have a sense of humor. Like, I'm sorry if some were offended by what I said. No, just say, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I made a boo-boo, and I just love to cook Chinese food."
Well, I do believe in the idea that, because personally, cultural appropriation wasn't ever something that I really considered as much, because a lot of my life I've been trying to assimilate into this Canadian culture, since I've grown up here. But the appropriation, I guess, situation is less of a concern for me, as I believe I personally want to share the culture rather than restrict it and gatekeep it. So if somebody else wants to take a portion of my culture, maybe say, for example, Chinese food, which a lot of people seem to love, and try to put a twist on it, to me that seems like an evolution in a way. My only problem is when people do it in an ignorant fashion, like you just described, and that just completely ignores history, right? And it shows it like the short-sightedness of people when they only see perhaps what started as a Western blend of Asian food to begin with. They never had the maybe the foresight to look beyond that to see where it stems from and maybe why people cook with certain ingredients that they cook with. But ultimately, I do think that I personally would like to mix culture, because I believe in progression. I believe in changing of times, and I don't personally believe in ownership of a culture, but I do believe in disrespect. So that's kind of how I see it. And maybe the problem is that they should just learn more about what they're trying to improve on, to understand perhaps why people eat a certain way. Maybe it's through a hard time in history where they had certain elements of ingredients available to them. And this is also kind of why I hate how people moral signal, if there are a certain if a certain type of people that only eats specific types of food.
You mean like veganism?
Maybe it's just like I'm not saying all vegans are bad. I'm just saying there are some out there who have to realize that being able to participate in something like veganism, or if you don't want to eat fish, I don't remember what that's called, but if there's like specific types of food that you don't eat, that it's not give you the right to kind of like chastise other people for doing that. I guess more prominently, I'm just talking about the really zealous ones. There are people who eat meat out there, and the really zealous ones who think like, oh, how could you? You think about these people, these animals, right? Like how their lives and how they're spent. Their lives are spent doing certain things. I mean, there's so much you can do for them too, as well. So I do agree to some element, but there is you can't get people to lean off of meat completely either. I just don't believe that's a fair outcome or a fair expectation.
You people. Can't, again, because veganism now, we talked about this before, still seems like it's rooted in a very white upper class kind of club, just because some of the ingredients that are used in recipes are a bit expensive, a bit inaccessible, and at least I don't know. Yeah, you can't use veganism as a way to demonize other cultures, because I know that the way we farm animals is disgusting, and I know that animals, if you're going to eat meat, it's much healthier for you to eat free range, etc., etc., but it's just not accessible to everyone.
Like an animal that's lived
different cultures have different ways and different ceremonies and reasons for eating meat in their lives. So
like, is that a form of cultural appropriation too, do you think? The dominant enforcing a culture standard that the minority may not have a proper access to. Like, I think there's a way that kind of fits into that description you provided at the beginning there.
I think it fits in somehow. I mean, I do feel a little bit weird sometimes when I see different dishes made vegan. Like, here's this traditionally meat-laden dish, but it's vegan.
Yeah.
But it's not the same thing, is it?
I remember
it's
you
not the veganized Chinese
hitting on
version of
vegan
that.
cheese.
Also, vegan cheese.
Maybe you feel really strongly about cheese or something.
I just think that...
I mean, what else do they have? If they want to eat cheese, they'll make something that's like cheese, but maybe not really
I know. And
cheese in a conventional
they have to package
sense.
it differently. They can't write CHEESE. They have to use a Z or something like that, or put 10 E's. But it's not a fermented milk product. That's my problem. But that's totally off topic.
We won't go too far into that one.
So, I have a classic example here in case you haven't had this horse beaten to death yet. So one classic example of cultural appropriation was in 2013 when Miley Cyrus reinvented her career. Do you remember when she suddenly came back from Sweet Hannah Montana and was like, bang?
Isn't that just like what every Disney star has to do to survive? Otherwise they become irrelevant, and they just never get out of that, like, the really good, nice personality on screen that they're always portrayed to be.
That's true, but there are other ways to have done it.
I'm grown up now.
Aside from taking
I wear
all
leather.
these elements from another culture and then just blasting yourself with it on TV. You know, with your hairstyles and your outfits and your twerking.
I hated how it always had to be so outrageous.
I mean, it was outrageous for one reason, no one was expecting it, and for the other reason, which no one really thought about at the time, if you weren't in a black community, then it's so offensive. It's so utterly offensive.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say. And she made so much money. So
what she did was, if I recall, she used elements of, I guess you would say, the black or African American culture. Are we specifically talking about, like, the hairstyle, like the cornrows?
And her outfits, and she put little rap bits in her songs, and she was twerking on anything that she could. She had grills in a lot of pictures.
So where I could see people would have grief with that is, say, perhaps the African American culture, people are doing that by getting chastised for, where instead members of the dominant majority, when they do it, it seems to be a trendy thing.
It was trendy. Everyone thought, wow, here's my money. Yeah, we can't stop giving you money.
And you could kind of see, I suppose, how, I mean, on a basic level, you could say it's unfair. But yeah, in a deeper sense, like, it's once again ignorant.
Yes.
And very inconsiderate, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't think about it, or whoever told her to change her style like that didn't think about it. Because they just view things through the dominant lens, I guess. It's okay to take things.
I don't know how this will sound, but, you know, I feel like on the other hand, I would almost say that her using those elements of the culture, kind of like, at least I would think that, oh, maybe she really likes that part of the culture, and she decides to, incorporate a part of it into herself. Now, you may be kind of hurt by it. There are people out there who may be hurt by that. But like it kind of brings more exposure to the culture for that group of people as well. I mean, if you get a celebrity to do something like that, even if, like, what if you just get an African American celebrity to do that? Like, I'm sure they would, because they kind of have that a little bit more of the status as well, that they'd be able to get some kind of reaction out of it, like positive reaction as well. One big thing I feel like is Miley Cyrus herself is already very popular, so it's part of her, like, adding another element to her personality.
But it was in very, very poor taste and a very ignorant choice to do.
So it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I could almost imagine her dancing at the award shows. I believe that was when I saw her kind of dressed like that, right? Yeah, so I mean, you may see it as trashy or something. I don't know. How would you describe that?
I wouldn't say trashy. I would just say that it was in poor taste, and as much as I can say, she should have thought about that a little bit better. But I mean, in 2013, if you're a white person, you didn't tend to think about it that much. We were so deep in our dominant culture, in our lens, that didn't really think about it, even until the past year, when everything came crashing onto our heads, like, oh, yeah, oh my God, who am I? So I think the root of cultural appropriation stems from a lack of education and consideration. What do you think?
I think education is very important in learning about, like, different cultures, so that when you're using elements of that culture, you do not disrespect the people behind it. Although I do believe that culture should very much be used by all members of the society. Perhaps the reason why a person, say in the majority, when they use an element of another minority's culture, get lots of positive benefit from it, is maybe they're catering it more to the majority of people. Where if you could perhaps also adopt, like, a element of your culture to the majority group, you may reap the benefits of that as well. Yeah. So even as a minority group, you can reap the benefits of that.
Culture sharing.
Yes.
And swapping.
I think that's kind of what I feel like should be the direction of that. I just don't like the intonation of cultural appropriation, from the fact that it seems like a gated kind of resolution. Like, you have to appropriate it, as in, you can't do that. No, or the other person can't do that. How can you do that?
For certain things, I think personally, no, you can't do that. And it's not for everything. I agree with you that we should go in the direction of cultural sharing and mutual respect, but there are certain things that I think that can be considered appropriation, such as the examples we talked about. And it's not to say everything, and it's not to say let's do gatekeeping and nitpick tiny little things. I don't want to say that. I just want to say, like, okay, like, we have free speech in Canada, but there are some things you just shouldn't say. I feel like that.
Yeah, so in general, I would say just don't disrespect people, right? If somebody's having a nice meal, don't disrespect their food, because, it's something that they enjoy, even though you might find it weird. Perhaps you haven't tried it yet. perhaps you haven't had it with your favorite foods mixed in somehow that you may enjoy even more. And I think that's all they're like, just be humanly good. Like be a good person, be a nice person, be a polite person. It shouldn't be too hard. Like cultural appropriation, I almost don't think it's that big of an issue, because people can take as much of a problem as they want with anything. They could almost anybody who wants to, for example, like I remember there was this one instance of was it a high school girl who decided to wear like a Chinese dress, this Chinese style dress, it's like a kipao or something like that, to her prom. And I believe it was an Asian person who was very offended by what he saw, and kind of told her, well, my culture is not your prom dress. And I don't really know about that. The kipao, like it's kind of a celebratory dress, and although there may or may not be some, I'm not a historian. Like there may be some hardships behind it, but from what I see is a person who really likes a certain style of dress from the Asian culture, and they decided to wear it to prom, which it's not a disrespectful event in any shape or form. They want to sport it. They're exposing others to the style of culture, and that is positive spotlight, if you will, on it. And more people, think about all the people at that high school who would see that dress and think, wow, that looks gorgeous, she looks gorgeous, what is she wearing? I want to know more about that. Just that positive exposure alone can garner a lot more, interest, and that interest can turn into knowledge when people look into it. Right? I think that's not a bad thing. I think that person taking offense to that is kind of, it's a subjective thing, sure. Like maybe some people can get hurt by it, but yeah, like there's a lot of people out there who will get hurt by certain things. What somebody's wearing, the way somebody talks, could be a part of their own trauma, or perhaps they were treated unfairly in a way. And I don't know if I'm sounding like an ass here, but this is how I feel about it. So
I would say, in my opinion, she definitely wasn't culturally appropriating the dress, in my opinion, because it's just one girl wearing it for her prom. She thought it was pretty. She thought she looked pretty in it. But I also think that the young man who was offended, he has a right to be offended. That's how he feels, and maybe maybe he didn't know her so well. Maybe he was scared that she was wearing it as a joke, because maybe he's been picked on for things like that before. I don't know.
Maybe he's been picked on for his culture.
Yeah.
Where maybe she might be a more popular personality around the school, that when she decided to use that element of the culture, she was praised and he was mocked, right? So I can see where that may be what he was feeling.
And again, this
However,
man is 17. He's only 17, let's remember.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, I see that the fact that she's wearing something like that, I would actually approach her and say, very nice dress, you can share a bit of your story with them. And if they're a decent human being, then you'll see that, right?
Yeah.
You'll see that. And it's not just, you'll be able to tell for yourself. And I think like the human touch of what I just explained there would be so much more beneficial than somebody who just looks at an image of another person at a prom and develop and kind of evolve their own imaginations off of that. You think, oh, maybe she's trying to mock us, or maybe she's just like, oh, she likes this but doesn't like the Asian people in general, or something like that. Like I don't think it's quite fair yet to make a conclusion just based off of
also
somebody's...
only 17.
Yeah.
These are kids. So sometimes they get a free pass for maybe not thinking things through before they do
So
them.
how young was Miley when she did her personality change?
Let's check it.
I don't think she was that old or mature, to be frank.
But to also be frank, she had a lot of people around her who could have said, hey, a lot of managers, a lot of Miley Cyrus, 2013 age.
2013, you remember the year? 21.
She was 21.
Youngin. She's a youngin. Like a university kid or college kid,
Yeah.
Yeah, and like people in that kind of age, or at least if you're in college or university, sometimes you may be prone to making a few mistakes here and there.
Oh, yeah.
Some bad decisions.
I just wish that
And I don't
some people
know if
around
that's a
her,
fair thing, yeah.
some of the adults would have said, like, it's not just you being crazy, it's this. But like I said earlier, in 2013...
maybe the family doesn't know either, right?
Well, like I
how,
said...
how well do you think they are exposed to
Well, in
other
2013,
cultures
no one
being...
thought about this. White people didn't think about this. If they did, they were truly, truly, truly the first ones to wake up. Because, like, we were all living in our little bubbles.
So, yeah, I think the cultural appropriation thing is kind of saying, guys, just remember, we came from this culture. If you enjoy something, kind of like share with one another and not just kind of take it for granted, I guess.
And just do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Just to see.
Yeah.
We have some smartphones now, so it's easier.
There's less excuse, but it's also so much easier for people to kind of, I don't know, like be hateful, be disrespectful of certain cultures. The internet helps, and there's also like drawbacks to all this. Like when people can be anonymous and kind of say very disrespectful things about certain cultures, and you know what I'm saying. At the same time, they can be very hypocritical by enjoying things of that culture while saying bad things about it. There's a lot of that, and that's why I think like the human, face-to-face interaction, a lot of times help dissolve those kind of feelings.
Yeah, definitely looking at your friend group, seeing who's in it and seeing who's not in it is an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, and you know what? Like for Miley Cyrus, take her as an example. Like, what do you think her friend group is? You think she's got a diverse group of friends? And
at that point,
and not to say that they have to have a diverse group of friends, but it's just like it's their product. They're a product of their environment, right? There's nature and nurture, but like the nurture plays so much of a part in a person's the way they see things, and if they only see so much, they might accidentally appropriate a culture because they've never actually had any exposure to it, which brings back the education, right? You just gotta learn about it, but that's not to say that it's exactly their fault. They may have made a mistake, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
So I guess the moral of the story is a little bit of education and consideration goes a long way, and
be decent human beings.
Have a growth mindset.
Be polite.
As says Richard. Growth mindset. Good.
Yeah, growth. Just be open to learning about different cultures, Just be open to gathering, taking in the history. Even if your first reaction to something is a little bit of disgust, kind of like try and hold it back a little bit.
Remember that disgust is cultural. We learn disgust in our various cultures. It's not a natural inborn emotion that we have as children. It's not like happiness or sadness. We learn disgust.
Yeah, you kind of see what other people are grossed out by, and that kind of shapes your view of maybe what's gross, right?
Yeah.
Product of your own environment. Yeah.
I guess that wraps it up.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for another podcast, the Fish Flip Podcast. This is Richard and Jenny.
We'll see you later.
We'll see you next time.